Okay, so tell me when y'all went to school and where y'all went.
I went in Montgomery to private school, Alabama Christian, and I graduated in 1966.
And I went to Woodlawn High School in 64,
Five.
65,
That's when you graduated.
when I graduated from high school.
Okay, so can you describe what daily segregation looked like during this time, like in the restaurants and just public places and things like that?
You didn't have them. The blacks didn't go into places where the whites went back in those days.
Mm-hmm.
They were, if you went into a grocery store, grocery stores may not have been the thing, but if you went into a restaurant, it'd be an all-white restaurant it's a wild, crazy mess. So everybody at Woodlawn was all white, all the players, everything. When I went to Alabama, it was basically white too.
Mm-hmm.
It hadn't really started changing then.
And when what we noticed and we grew up with, but it seemed normal, was that the water fountains would say white or colored, because it was called, they weren't called blacks, they were called colored. And a colored person could not drink out of a white water fountain. Same thing in restaurants; they couldn't be served, and at the any of the restaurants. So that's what it was like.
Yeah, if you went downtown to any place downtown, they would have fountains that were for blacks and fountains for whites. It never did make a whole lot of sense, even when I was going. But anyway, long story short, you're just taught that way when I was young.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we didn't think anything different because that's why we grew up. And on the bus, all the blacks would ride in the back of the bus, and there was a certain section right there that behind that bar is where they would sit, and all the whites would sit in the front.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how it was, but we didn't really know any different at that time.
Right. So, Papa, you went to Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about the time when they tried to integrate the two kids into the university?
When they did, they come to. We weren't out there when they did that. When they come out, they kind of had it closed up and the whole works. But they come to the door,
Mm-hmm.
and the governor,
George Wallace
was, and he come to the door and he stood in the door and wouldn't let them come in at that time. But I think we were in classes then.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember what happened up front. So
Yeah.
we got pulled out on the front because it was just a crazy time. The kids, they got all the football players to come out in front and try to stop some of the things that was going on out front because they were trying to turn the buses over. Just a bus.
city bus.
Who were trying to turn over?
Huh?
Who were trying to turn the buses over?
Kids in the school, some of the kids that were just troublemakers were out there trying to turn a bus over. They're the stupidest thing because there were some blacks on it. I mean, that's what it was all about. There were blacks on it, and they were going to turn the bus over. So all the football players got called out to get out there and get them back in the building, get all that group back in the building because they were coming out, and it was a mess. But anyway, so we got that under control. We got everybody settled down there, but it was stuff like that was just stupid.
Mm-hmm.
It really was.
Another thing, when I was growing up, my sister and I were 2 years apart, and we were young before we started elementary school. And we had a maid, and she kept us during the day while my mother worked. And when we would go somewhere like downtown, if we were going downtown to see mother or the maid was taking us anywhere. They call them nannies now, but we had a maid, and she just kind of cleaned the house and took care of us. But when we went anywhere, we would go on the bus with her, and she would ride in the back, we would ride in the front, and it was, you're always looking back to see if she's there because, it was just strange that she couldn't sit with us, and we didn't understand that. But one thing that my my mother would do is when it was time to take her home, and this is during the time where things were starting to kind of heat up a little bit, but not come to a full head at that time, she would take her home and wouldn't let her ride a bus home. She would take her in our car, and we would take her to her home, which was in the projects basically, and it wasn't really a safe place to be at that time. But she would do that.
Did she have any children of her own?
No, she did not have any children. She was young and she was married, and but she didn't have any children at the time. We were her children, and we just loved her. She was
So
sweet to us.
she was treated really well in y'all's family.
Very well. Very well.
Did any of your friends have like maids also?
Some did, yeah, because that was kind of a common thing that you'd have a maid, if your mother worked out of the home, which my mother did. And then some people would just hire them to come and iron and do some housework and stuff like that, and not really take care of children, but that's what they would do, yeah. You know what? Actually, I'm so stupid. Tom graduated in 1959. I graduated in 1966. So there was no integration during 59 when he was in it. So that's why there weren't any blacks. We got the date wrong earlier. But then when I was in school, that's when things kind of started. So we made a mistake on that date, but it was 1959. They didn't have any segregation at that time.
Okay, so I did a paper about the 16th Street church bombing. Do you remember anything about that event?
Yeah, it was it's all over the place, but Tommy knows something more about it than I do.
Yeah, my stepfather, he was the first one to get to the bombing. And of course, we got this piece of paper that shows
Article of him at the
was there.
16th Street bombing, and he's the officer, police officer, is what
where they bombed the 4 kids that was in the church.
Yeah.
And he was one of the first policemen to get there. And it was just tragic. It really was. Unbelievable at the time.
So tell me about the time that you were at work and you witnessed the demonstrations.
Yeah, they were having demonstrations downtown. The blacks were demonstrating downtown, and that brought on more disturbances from everybody. The police were down there, and they were trying to get them back, and it was just a tremendous mess downtown. And we were actually there working in the buildings, so it didn't have anything to do with what was going out. And we had black people working side to side. We didn't understand it either, but anyway, it didn't make sense. But anyway, they were protesting downtown that they weren't getting the rights that they deserved downtown. So that's what started all the protesting downtown and the rioting downtown. There was tremendous rioting down in Birmingham at that time. So, and our city hall wasn't what the city hall is today. I mean, they had a guy in the city hall that he'd put you in jail just for being out there. So it was a mess back in those days.
So like, do you remember seeing like the policemen putting the hoses and the dogs? And
That's the only way they could stop them down there at the time. They were turning the hose on them, and we were up in another building watching what was going on. But yeah, they'd turn the hose on and water them down and everything else to try to get everybody dispersed. They were trying to make everybody go because they were walking downtown and they were doing what they wanted to too. They could bust glasses or whatever, so they were trying to shut things down. So it was just a big mess out there.
Speaking of shutting down, they shut down the water.
Yeah, shut down all the fountains. Yeah, all the water fountains in the buildings where they couldn't drink out of them.
But now they shut the colored, as they'd say, they did the whites too, so nobody could drink out of it.
Yeah.
They had to shut the whole thing down. So
Yeah,
it's,
they cut all the water down where you couldn't drink out of it. They didn't want them drinking out of your water fountain, which, I mean, we were in some times that are, you can go back and tell it and people just look at you like, are you kidding me? And I agree. It didn't make sense. Yeah.
Okay, so how did y'all's parents feel about blacks during this time and everything?
Well, in the early times, it was the same thing. The biggest problem I think that we all of us had at that time was they didn't have anything that, I know there were good ones out there, but they didn't have, blacks didn't have the things that washing in the horse. They may not wash. They'd come to work for a week and never even bathe or whatever.
Mhm.
So, and they had a place to bathe where my dad worked. So, but I listened to him talking. I mean, they were scared to death that they were going to catch something or whatever. And they did have a lot of that. In fact, they had people come in and check them out regularly.
So,
See if they
so
caught
blacks
anything.
had diseases and stuff like that
Yes,
where your dad
much
worked.
so. All kinds. So they had to worry about that. And I'm sure there's some whites that did, but I mean, that was the problem back in those days, and that's many days, years ago.
Mhm.
We're talking about age now.
Mhm.
So I can't tell you anybody I know right today that would be that way. So, but anyway,
How'd your dad like them?
well, he had been around them so long that he, if you ask him about them, blah, 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 blah. So he just took it that way. So anyway, I'd go down there. They were as nice as they could be. I never had any trouble with any of them that I ever dealt with or whatever, but I don't know, it's a different world back in those days. He worked at Jaffe Wall downtown, and it was just, they did scrap metal down there, so. Of course, they're no longer there, but anyway.
Mhm.
It was a different time for, the older generation didn't accept the change. Really, I think it's what it was now, as far as my parents were concerned.
Your
They-
parents didn't live downtown.
No, they didn't live downtown, no. We lived in Montgomery, but as far as my parents were concerned with this, type situation, my dad was a musician and he also sold instruments, musical instruments to bands. And so he went to the black schools and the white schools and he sold instruments to both. And he, had friends that were band directors that were at black schools. Mother taught us to respect everybody, and they never talked about blacks, and she treated everybody the same. So that's the way we grew up in our family.
Mhm.
So we didn't have any issues with them at all. We didn't understand segregation, but then, nobody did at that time.
Now, as adults, how do y'all look back and reflect on those times now?
But for me, it was just a different time. Everything was different, though. The way of life was different. Everything was different. You were free to go in your neighborhoods late at night or whatever. Now things are different in that times have changed. So back then, I didn't think about anything about it back then, nor during the change so much, because I never really was involved in it, and my parents were always respectful and taught us to be respectful to blacks. Now, as I look back on it, I can see that the change has made it better for blacks, but also it has given rise to the difference in the younger blacks as opposed to when we were growing up, and the older black people were very respectful and that type thing. And now demonstrations kind of make me think sometimes that it's more out of anger than trying to get what they want.
Mhm.
This is just my opinion now, because nobody, even if it's whites demonstrating, if it's blacks or whatever, you got to do it in a respectful way. And just seeing things that are happening like in Ferguson and whatever now kind of reminds you of what happened back then, but for a different reason.
Well, I just think that things begin to straighten themselves out where people can live with each other better today than they used to. If you were black, you had this purpose, and if you were white, you had this purpose, and now your neighbors are black, and they have to deal with whites and everything else, and we don't have the problems that we used to have. But maybe I may be talking about our particular neighborhoods and there, but I don't think anywhere you go nowadays you have problems where you can go in any restaurant you want and eat. You can go in anything and nobody says anything about it. And it works. It's a different attitude that people have woke up to the fact that it's stupid back in those days. There's no sense in it. And I understand some of the problems they had. And I won't even go into that, but back in those days. But,
Well, for sure, things have changed in a better way,
yeah.
for sure. Because everybody should have the equal rights and equal whatever
And
the
do.
situation in, and do, right.
And do that.
So that's, that, you know.
Pictures often up. And I'll tell you, the biggest problem they had back in the days, the blacks had syphilis. They had every kind of disease you could think of because they were raised up in that.
Well, they were poor.
They were poor. They were raised up in it. They didn't, and that's what caused most of the problems back in those days. Or my dad worked. They'd have to take them to the hospital. So they had so much whatever they got that they couldn't even walk and everything. So they'd get them to the hospital and they'd get whatever they did. I don't know what they did, but anyway, the times have changed from what we were back in those days. I mean, we didn't have any problem when I was in high school. I mean, and when I went to college, we didn't have any problem down there. But still, it was.
It was beginning to start, though. That's
Yeah.
when it began to start
Yeah.
and build up.
Yeah.